I'm taking your son away.
No, you can't.
Oh, I can, and I will.
I wanted to see the look on your face when we take away your son. That's what Daniel said to me in the courtroom hallway, voice low enough that only I could hear it, loud enough that he wanted me to feel the weight of it settle into my chest like a stone. He leaned back against the wooden bench outside Judge Ramirez's chambers, arms crossed, that smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. The same one he'd worn since we were kids. The one that said he knew something you didn't, that he'd already won before you realized you were playing. Behind him, my parents stood side by side, watching. My mother, Pauline, adjusted the pearls at her throat, her expression serene in that practiced way she had, like she was posing for a portrait that would hang in a hallway. No one walked down. My father, Richard, checked his watch. Expensive, gold, the kind that made a statement without saying a word. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was the message. They were here to take my son, and they believed, with the kind of certainty that comes from never being told no, that they would succeed. I didn't answer Daniel. I looked at him for a long moment, let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until his smirk faltered just slightly, and then I turned back toward the courtroom doors. My attorney, Marisol Grant, stood a few feet away, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. She was good at that, at keeping her face neutral, her voice steady, her strategy invisible, until the exact moment it needed to be seen. She glanced at me, gave the smallest nod, and I knew. We were ready. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air, the kind of space that had absorbed decades of arguments and heartbreak and decisions that changed lives in the span of a sentence. The gallery was half full, mostly other families waiting for their own hearings. A few reporters who'd caught wind that this case involved the Cross family, old Austin, money with enough name recognition to fill a few column inches. I sat at the table on the left side of the room, Marisol beside me, her hands folded neatly over a stack of documents she hadn't opened yet. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his attorney, Howard Linton, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for winning cases through charm and aggressive cross-examination. Behind them, my parents occupied the first row of the gallery, silent and watchful, like judges presiding over a trial they'd already decided. This wasn't about my son, not really. It was about control. It was about the fact that I had walked away from them years ago, built a life they hadn't approved, made choices they couldn't manipulate, and refused to come crawling back when things got hard. Noah was just the leverage they'd been waiting for. The one piece of my life they could still reach. The one vulnerability I couldn't hide. If you've ever been in a room where people who are supposed to love you are actively working to destroy you, you know the feeling. It's not anger, not at first. It's disbelief. It's the cold, creeping realization that the stories you told yourself about family, about loyalty, about safety, were just that. Stories. Judge Evelyn Ramirez entered through the side door, and we all stood. She was in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd heard every lie, every excuse, every manipulation tactic the legal system had to offer, and had long since stopped being impressed. She sat, gestured for us to do the same, and opened the file in front of her. This is a petition for emergency custody modification, filed by Daniel Cross and Richard and Pauline Cross regarding the minor child, Noah Cross, currently in the primary custody of Elena Cross. Her voice was steady, clinical, stripping the emotion from the words and leaving only the framework. "Mr. Linton, you may proceed." Howard Linton stood, buttoning his jacket with the kind of theatrical precision that told you he knew how to work a room. He smiled at the judge, not warmly but professionally, the smile of someone who believed he was about to deliver a performance worth remembering. "Your Honor, thank you. This case, while painful for all involved, is ultimately about the best interests of a 7-year-old boy who deserves stability, safety, and the presence of family members who can provide for his emotional and physical needs." He paused, letting the words land, his gaze sweeping the room as if addressing a jury that wasn't there. The petitioners, Daniel Cross, Noah's uncle, and Richard and Pauline Cross, Noah's grandparents, have come forward out of genuine concern for the child's welfare. They have observed patterns of behavior in Ms. Cross that suggest she is not currently capable of providing the level of care Noah requires. I kept my face still. I'd known this was coming. Marisol had warned me. They would paint me as unstable, reckless, emotionally volatile. They would twist every story, every memory, every moment of my life into evidence of my unfitness. And they would do it with conviction, because they believed it. They had spent so long rewriting the narrative of our family that they no longer remembered what was true. Howard continued, detailing a version of my life that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. He spoke of financial instability, conveniently ignoring that I'd paid off my student loans, owned my home outright, and had a steady income from freelance consulting work that allowed me to set my own hours and be present for Noah. He spoke of emotional volatility, referencing an argument I'd had with my mother 2 years ago, the one where I'd finally told her that her constant criticism wasn't welcome in my home, that her need to control every aspect of my life had done enough damage. He spoke of lack of support systems, as if the fact that I'd chosen to distance myself from toxic relationships meant I was isolated, rather than intentional. Daniel took the stand. He wore a navy suit, crisp and tailored, his hair combed back, his expression solemn. He was playing the role of concerned uncle, the responsible family member stepping in to protect a child from a mother who couldn't be trusted. He answered Howard's questions with careful phrasing, his voice steady and rehearsed. "I love my sister," he said, and I almost laughed. "But I've watched her struggle for years. She's always been difficult, unpredictable. She pushes people away, refuses help, and now Noah is paying the price." He told stories, half-truths wrapped in enough context to sound plausible. The time I'd missed a family dinner because Noah had the flu, reframed as me isolating the child from his family. The time I'd declined their offer to pay for Noah's private school tuition, reframed as me refusing to accept support that would benefit the child. The time I'd set boundaries around unannounced visits, reframed as me being hostile and uncooperative. If you've ever watched someone weaponize kindness, you know how insidious it is. They don't say you're a bad person. They say they're worried about you. They say they want to help. They say they're acting out of love. And if you push back, you're the one who looks unreasonable. My mother took the stand next. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice breaking in all the right places. She spoke about how much she loved Noah, how she tried so hard to maintain a relationship with me, how heartbreaking it was to be shut out of her grandson's life. She didn't mention the voicemails she'd left, the ones where she told me I was ruining Noah's future by raising him without proper guidance. She didn't mention the texts she'd sent after I stopped responding to her calls, the ones that said I was selfish, ungrateful, that I would regret keeping her away. The courtroom listened. Some faces showed sympathy. Others looked skeptical. Judge. Ramirez's expression remained neutral, her pen moving occasionally across her notes. Marisol didn't cross-examine aggressively. She asked a few pointed questions, clarifications mostly, that subtly exposed inconsistencies in their testimony. She let them talk. She let them build their case, brick by brick, until it stood tall and proud and full of holes they hadn't noticed yet. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my answers short, factual, and calm. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I didn't cry or plead or try to explain the years of manipulation and control that had led to this moment. I simply stated the facts. Noah was healthy, happy, thriving in school. He had friends, hobbies, a stable routine. He saw a pediatrician regularly. He had no behavioral issues. He had a mother who loved him and a home where he felt safe. Howard tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He brought up the argument with my mother, the missed family events, the fact that I'd chosen to limit contact with my family. I answered each question the same way, calmly, without emotion, without rising to the bait. "Ms. Cross, isn't it true that you have a history of conflict with your family?" I set boundaries with people who were harmful to my well-being. Yes. Isn't it true that you've refused financial assistance that could have benefited your son? I've chosen to provide for my son independently. Yes. Isn't it true that you've kept Noah away from his grandparents? I've limited contact with individuals who have demonstrated manipulative and controlling behavior. Yes. The more I refused to engage emotionally, the more frustrated he became, and the more the judge's pen moved across her notes. Marisol's case was surgical. She presented documentation, school records showing Noah's academic performance and social development, pediatric records showing consistent well-child visits and up-to-date vaccinations, financial records showing stable income and savings, counseling records from a family therapist who confirmed that Noah was emotionally healthy and securely attached to me. She presented text messages and voicemails, the ones my family had sent over the past 2 years, the ones that revealed the true nature of their concern. Threats disguised as worry, retaliation disguised as love, and then she presented the evidence that shifted the entire room. "Your Honor," Marisol said, standing and addressing the judge directly. "Before we proceed further, I'd like to request that the court review sealed records pertaining to Mr. Daniel Cross, specifically regarding his legal history as it relates to contact with minors." The room went silent. Daniel's face drained of color. Howard Linton's hands froze mid-page turn. My parents' expressions shifted from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. Judge Ramirez looked up from her notes, her gaze sharp. "Ms. Grant, are you suggesting there is relevant sealed information that pertains to this custody matter?" "Yes, Your Honor. Information that was not disclosed in the original petition and that directly impacts the petitioner's suitability as custodians." The judge's expression didn't change, but her tone did. "Mr. Linton, were you aware of any sealed records involving your client?" Howard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, Yes or no, Counselor? I was not made aware of any such records at the time of filing." Judge Ramirez's gaze shifted to Daniel. "Mr. Cross, do you have a sealed record involving minors?" Daniel didn't answer. He looked at Howard, then at my parents, then down at the table. The judge's voice was ice. "I'll take that as confirmation. This court will recess for 30 minutes while I review the relevant documents. All parties will remain in the building." She stood, we stood, and as she disappeared through the side door, the room erupted in whispers. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't look at my parents. I looked straight ahead, hands folded in my lap, while Marisol gathered her papers and leaned close to my ear. "Breathe," she said quietly. "We've got this." The 30 minutes felt like hours. We waited in a small conference room down the hall, Marisol reviewing notes, me staring at the wall, trying not to think about what would happen if this didn't work, if the judge sided with them anyway, if I lost my son to people who saw him as a trophy and me as an obstacle. When we returned to the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The reporters were leaning forward. My parents sat rigid and pale. Daniel wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Judge Ramirez re-entered, her expression unreadable, and we all stood again. "Please be seated," she said, and the room obeyed. She opened a folder, glanced at the documents inside, and then looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Cross, the court has reviewed sealed records indicating that you were subject to a restraining order filed by a former employer 3 years ago, stemming from allegations of inappropriate conduct with a minor in your care. While the case was ultimately settled without criminal charges, the restraining order remains active and prohibits you from unsupervised contact with minors under the age of 16. The room held its breath. This information was not disclosed in your petition for custody. It is, in fact, directly relevant to your suitability as a custodian for a 7-year-old child. Howard Linton stood, his voice unsteady. "Your Honor, my client was not aware that your client is an attorney, Mr. Linton. He is well aware of disclosure requirements, as are you." She turned her attention to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Cross, were you aware of this restraining order when you joined this petition? My father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. My mother shook her head, her hands trembling. I see. Judge Ramirez closed the folder. This petition for emergency custody modification is denied. Furthermore, given the lack of disclosure and the nature of the allegations that prompted this filing, the court finds that this petition was filed in bad faith and with retaliatory intent. She looked at me for the first time, her expression softening just slightly. Ms. Cross, full custody of Noah Cross is affirmed. Mr. Daniel Cross is prohibited from unsupervised contact with the minor child pending further review. Mr. and Mrs. Cross, you are formally warned that any further attempts to interfere with Miss Cross's custody or to alienate the child from his mother will result in legal consequences, including potential restriction of your visitation rights. She brought the gavel down once. This hearing is adjourned. I didn't move. I couldn't. The words were still settling, the reality of what had just happened still too large to fit inside my chest. Marisol touched my arm gently, and I turned to look at her. She was smiling, not triumphantly, but with quiet relief. "It's over," she said. And it was. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun slanted gold across the stone steps. Reporters gathered near the entrance, cameras ready, questions prepared. I walked past them without stopping, Marisol at my side, my phone already buzzing with messages I wouldn't read. Noah was waiting at a friend's house, safe and unaware of how close he'd come to being used as a weapon. I would pick him up soon, take him home, make dinner, read him a story before bed. Life would continue, quieter now, simpler, without the weight of people who mistook control for love. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't need to. The story they'd tried to write about me, the unstable mother, the difficult daughter, the woman who needed saving from herself, was finished. And the truth, quiet and data-backed and undeniable, had spoken louder than all their carefully crafted lies. They wanted to see the look on my face when they took away my son. They never got the chance. The weeks that followed were strange in their stillness. I'd spent so long bracing for the next attack, the next manipulation, the next carefully worded message designed to make me doubt myself, that the absence of it felt almost disorienting, like walking into a room and realizing the background noise you'd learned to tune out had finally stopped. I changed my phone number, blocked my family's emails, set up filters so that anything they sent would vanish into a folder I never opened. Marisol had advised me to keep records just in case, but I didn't need to read them. I knew what they'd say. Apologies that weren't really apologies. Justifications wrapped in concern. Attempts to rewrite what had happened to frame themselves as the victims of a misunderstanding, to suggest that maybe, with time, we could all move past this. But I was done moving past things. I was done pretending that silence was the same as forgiveness, that distance was the same as healing. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Noah asked about them once, a few days after the trial. We were in the kitchen, and he was drawing at the table while I made dinner. He looked up from his paper, crayon paused mid-stroke, and said, "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming for my birthday?" I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. His expression was curious, not sad. He was 7. He didn't understand the weight of what had happened, didn't know how close he'd come to being torn away from the only stability he'd ever known. And I wanted to keep it that way. "No, honey," I said gently. "They're not going to be visiting for a while." "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that, how to explain betrayal to a child, how to teach him that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "people don't treat each other the way they should. And when that happens, it's okay to take a break from them. It doesn't mean you're angry. It just means you're keeping yourself safe." He considered this, then nodded and went back to his drawing. Okay, that was it. No follow-up questions, no tears, just acceptance the way kids have when they trust that the adults in their lives are handling things. I turned back to the cutting board, my hands steady, and finished making dinner. The story could have ended there. In a lot of ways, it did. The legal battle was over. The custody was affirmed. My family was out of my life, and Noah was safe. But endings aren't always clean. They don't tie up neatly with a bow and a sense of closure. Sometimes they linger, unfinished, like a sentence that trails off mid-thought. 3 months after the trial, I got a letter. Not from my family, from my father's attorney, a different one this time, someone who specialized in estate planning. It was brief, formal, and to the point. My Aunt Vivian, the only member of the Cross family who'd ever treated me like a person instead of a problem, had passed away, and she'd left me something. I hadn't seen Vivian in years. She'd moved to Santa Fe after her husband died, bought a small adobe house near the plaza, and spent her days painting and volunteering at a local women's shelter. She was the one who'd warned me, back when I was still in college, that my family would never forgive me for wanting something different. "They don't see you, Elena," she'd said over coffee one afternoon, her voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. "They see a reflection of themselves, and when you stop reflecting what they want to see, they'll try to break you." She'd been right. The letter instructed me to contact the attorney to arrange for the transfer of assets. I called the next day, and he explained that Vivian had left me her house, a small investment account, and an envelope marked for Elena when she's ready. "What's in the envelope?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "She instructed that it be given to you unopened." 2 weeks later, I flew to Santa Fe. Noah stayed with a friend, his best friend's family, people I trusted, people who didn't ask questions or try to insert themselves into my life. I rented a car at the airport and drove through the high desert, past adobe walls and piñon trees and skies so blue they looked unreal. Vivian's house was small and bright, filled with her paintings. Abstract landscapes, bold colors, shapes that suggested emotion more than form. The attorney met me there, handed me the keys, the paperwork, and the envelope, and then left me alone. I sat on the floor in the living room, the envelope in my lap, and stared at it for a long time. When I finally opened it, I found a letter, handwritten on thick cream paper, and a flash drive. The letter was vintage Vivian, direct, unsentimental, and fiercely loving. "Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye in person, but I've never been good at those. You know that. I'm leaving you this house because I think you'll understand what it means. It's not just a place. It's a choice. A life built on your own terms, away from people who tried to shape you into something you were never meant to be." The flash drive contains something I should have given you years ago. Documents, evidence, proof of things your family tried very hard to keep hidden. I gathered them over the years because I knew, eventually, you'd need them. Not for revenge, you're better than that, but for protection, for truth. You've already won the war that mattered most, but if they come for you again, and people like them always do, you'll have everything you need to make sure they can't. Live well, Elena. Love fiercely, and never let anyone convince you that setting boundaries makes you the villain. Vivian. I held the letter for a long time, my throat tight, my eyes burning. Then I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I found there was a map of my family's secrets, meticulously documented, financial records showing shell companies, offshore accounts, tax evasion schemes that went back decades, emails between my father and his business partners discussing bribes, kickbacks, and illegal contracts, evidence of the restraining order against Daniel, not just the one the court had unsealed, but 2 others settled quietly, paid off, buried, and more, so much more. Vivian had spent years collecting this piece by piece because she knew what kind of people they were. She knew that power, unchecked, becomes cruelty. That silence, unbroken, becomes complicity. I sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by her paintings, and I understood. She'd given me the one thing they feared most, the truth. I didn't do anything with the flash drive right away. I made copies, stored them in multiple secure locations, and then I went home. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't need to. Just knowing it existed was enough. Life went back to its quiet rhythm. Noah started second grade. I took on new clients. We went to the park, the library, the farmer's market. We built blanket forts and watched movies and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. We were ordinary in the best possible way. But 6 months after Vivian's death, I got a message. It came through a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd worked with my father years ago, someone who still moved in those circles. He said my parents were considering legal action again. Not for custody this time, they'd learned that lesson, but for grandparent visitation rights, a legal maneuver designed to force me to allow them access to Noah on a court-mandated schedule. The message ended with a warning. They're telling people you're unstable, that you've isolated the child, that someone needs to intervene before it's too late. I read it twice. Then I called Marisol. "They're doing it again," I said. "I know," she replied. "I got a letter from their attorney this morning." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Do you want to fight this?" I thought about Noah, about the life we'd built, about the peace we'd finally found. I thought about Vivian, about the envelope she'd left me, about the truth she'd armed me with. "No," I said. "I want to end it." Marisol didn't ask what I meant. She knew. I didn't leak the documents. I didn't go to the press. I didn't make a public spectacle or try to destroy them in some dramatic cinematic way. That's not how truth works when you wield it with precision. Instead, I sent a single email. It went to my parents, to Daniel, and to their attorneys. No subject line, just an attachment and 3 sentences. I have documentation of financial fraud, tax evasion, and multiple sealed legal settlements involving minors. If you pursue any further legal action against me or attempt to contact me or my son in any capacity, these documents will be submitted to the appropriate authorities. This is not a negotiation. I hit send and closed my laptop. The response came within an hour. Not from my parents. From their attorney, a man named Gregory Hale, who I'd never met but whose reputation preceded him, Ms. Cross. "I have advised my clients to withdraw their petition for visitation rights. They will not be pursuing any further legal action. They request that this matter be considered closed. Respectfully, Gregory Hale." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just retreat. I deleted the email and never thought about it again. If you've ever held power you didn't ask for, you know how strange it feels. Like wearing a coat that's slightly too big, that weighs more than it should. You don't enjoy it, you don't want it, but you wear it anyway, because the alternative is being crushed by people who have no problem using theirs. I never wanted to be the person who had to weaponize truth. I wanted a family that loved me without conditions, that saw me as more than a reflection or a problem to solve. But that family didn't exist. And once I accepted that, once I stopped mourning what I'd never had, I found something better. I found peace. 2 years later, Noah and I moved to Santa Fe. We kept the house Vivian left me, turned it into our home. I painted the kitchen yellow. Noah claimed the room with the big window that overlooked the courtyard. We planted tomatoes and herbs in the garden. We learned the names of the birds that visited the feeder we hung from the portal. Life became small in the best way. We knew our neighbors. We had routines. We existed without the constant hum of tension that had defined so much of my life before. Noah thrived. He made friends easily, joined the school's art club, started learning Spanish. He was happy. Not in the loud, performative way people expect kids to be, but in the quiet, steady way that comes from feeling safe. And I finally learned what it meant to breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, nearly 3 years after the trial, Noah and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep violet. He was reading a book, his legs tucked under him, his face serious in that way kids get when they're absorbed in a story. He looked up suddenly and asked, "Mom, do you think people can change?" I set down the mug of tea I'd been holding and turned to face him. "What makes you ask that?" He shrugged. "There's a kid at school who used to be really mean, but now he's nice. I was just wondering if people can really change." or if they're just pretending. I thought about my family, about the apologies that never came, the accountability that was never taken, the patterns that repeated across generations. I thought about Vivian, who'd chosen differently, who'd walked away from a legacy of harm and built something better. I think some people can change, I said carefully, but only if they want to, only if they're willing to look at themselves honestly and do the hard work of becoming different. And a lot of people, they're not willing to do that. Noah considered this, then nodded. That makes sense. He went back to his book, and I went back to the sky, and the conversation ended there. But the question stayed with me. I never heard from my family again. Not directly, but I heard about them through the grapevine, through the occasional news article, through people who still moved in those circles. My father's company was audited a year after I sent that email. Nothing came of it publicly, but I heard he'd quietly stepped down from the board, that he'd settled some financial discrepancies out of court. My mother stopped hosting her annual charity galas, the ones she'd used for years to build her reputation as Austin's most generous philanthropist. Daniel moved to California, as far from the Cross family name as geography would allow. They didn't fall dramatically. They just diminished, the way people do when the facade finally cracks and there's nothing underneath but insecurity and fear. I didn't take pleasure in it. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I just felt distant, like watching something happen to people I used to know a long time ago in a life that no longer felt like mine. The story doesn't end with a grand revelation or a final confrontation. It ends the way most real stories do, quietly, in the spaces between moments, in the decision to keep walking forward instead of looking back. Noah is 10 now. He's tall for his age, all elbows and knees and questions about the universe. He wants to be an astronaut, or maybe an artist, or maybe both. He doesn't remember the custody battle. He doesn't remember the courtroom, the lawyers, the fear. He just remembers moving to Santa Fe, starting a new school, making new friends, and that's how it should be. I still have the flash drive. It sits in a safe deposit box at a bank downtown. Insurance, against a threat that will probably never materialize again. But it's there, just in case, because I learned something in that courtroom, something Vivian tried to teach me years before I was ready to hear it. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to exist. And sometimes, the most elegant form of justice is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to, because you've already won. On quiet mornings, when Noah is still asleep and the house is filled with that soft, golden light that only exists in the desert, I sit on the porch with my coffee and I think about the person I used to be, the woman who apologized for taking up space, who second-guessed her own reality, who believed that if she just tried hard enough, her family would finally see her. I don't miss her, but I'm grateful to her, because she survived long enough to become me. And I'm grateful to Vivian, who saw me when no one else did, who armed me with truth when I needed it most, who showed me that walking away isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. If you've ever been told that setting boundaries makes you selfish, that protecting yourself makes you cruel, that choosing your own peace over someone else's comfort makes you the villain, I want you to know something. You're not the villain. You're the person who had the courage to say no, to say enough, to say, I deserve better than this. And you do. We all do. The last time I thought about the trial, really thought about it, was on Noah's 10th birthday. We had a small party in the backyard, just a few friends, a homemade cake, a piñata shaped like a rocket ship. Noah laughed so hard he couldn't breathe, his face flushed and happy, surrounded by people who loved him without conditions. And I realized this was the future they tried to steal from me. This moment, this joy, this quiet, ordinary, beautiful life. They wanted to see the look on my face when they took away my son, but they never saw this. They never saw him blow out his candles and make a wish. They never saw him open his gifts and hug his friends and fall asleep that night with frosting still on his cheek and a smile on his face. They never saw the life I built after I walked away from them. And that more than any courtroom victory, more than any truth I could have exposed, is the ending I choose. Not revenge, not destruction, just peace, just this, just us.